Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are a man looking around at the modern landscape today, the economy, the dating market, the family court system,
Yeah,
and you have this kind of gnawing feeling that the game is rigged.
yeah, that the rules have been rewritten specifically to corner you.
Exactly. Then you really need to pull up a chair and turn the volume up for this one, because today we are not skirting around the edges.
No, we are diving straight into the fire.
We really are. And before we launch into it, and trust me, we are going to launch, do us a massive favor, hit that like and subscribe button right now. We cover the topics that other outlets are genuinely afraid to touch, and your support is the only thing keeping the lights on here so we can keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered content.
Absolutely. And regarding our source material today, it's not a light beach read. We are reviewing an ebook called The Gynocracy by Conrad Riker. It is an ultra-long, incisive, and fascinating manifesto. Riker comes out swinging with economic data, history, philosophy. It's essentially a red pill encyclopedia for men's rights activists and men in the manosphere who want to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, it's a massive text.
Yeah.
And if you want the full experience, which we highly recommend so you can see the charts and the data for yourself, you can grab it right now on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
You really should, because to understand Riker's premise, you need to understand the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists, which is a huge part of his argument.
So let's get right into the mission of this deep dive. Because Riker isn't just complaining that dating is hard or that, modern movies are too woke.
No, not at all.
He's making a massive structural claim about civilization itself. He argues that we aren't living in a democracy anymore, and we certainly aren't living in a patriarchy.
Right. His central thesis is that we are living in a gynocracy. And he defines this not as some secret, shadowy conspiracy, but as an overt economic system.
An economic system.
Yeah, a system that he argues is specifically engineered to extract resources from productive men to fund what he calls a welfare aristocracy. And that aristocracy consists of women and the state.
That is a hell of a claim to start with. Just the phrase resource extraction. It sounds industrial, like mining or drilling, but instead of oil or coal, the raw resource is male labor.
That's the core metaphor of the entire book, and that brings us directly to his first major concept, the economic engine of this whole thing. He calls it the gynocentric tithe.
The tithe. It sounds medieval.
It does.
It implies this mandatory payment to a church or a feudal lord. So break that down for us. What exactly is he talking about here from an economic standpoint?
Well, he uses tithe intentionally to evoke that mandatory, unescapable payment. But Riker argues this isn't just a theory. He presents it as a verifiable economic reality by introducing the concept of the net negative taxpayer.
I found this part fascinating because he really brings receipts here. He's not just throwing out opinions, he's looking at the actual ledger.
Precisely. Riker points to longitudinal tax studies, and he cites data from the UK, the US, and even the Nordic social democracies to argue that over the course of an entire lifetime, the average woman is a net negative contributor to the tax base.
Meaning, if you look at the whole timeline, from the day she's born to the day she dies, she takes out more in state funds than she ever puts in.
Exactly. When you tally up state services, healthcare usage, welfare programs, education costs, and especially pensions and old age care.
Because women live longer.
Right, they live longer and draw pensions longer. So Riker argues the data shows she consumes significantly more public funds than she pays back in taxes.
But the state doesn't just print money out of thin air. Well, we'll get to his thoughts on inflation later. But generally, that surplus has to come from somewhere. Someone has to balance the ledger.
And that bill, according to Riker, is paid by the net positive contributor, which is the average man. He argues that men, particularly men working in the private sector, pay the vast majority of the taxes that fund the infrastructure, the military, and the social safety nets that everyone else uses.
So he frames the modern state not as a neutral governing body, but basically as a massive wealth transfer mechanism.
A protection racket is what he calls it.
Yes, the protection racket. That's the phrase that really stuck with me.
It's a powerful analogy. In a mob protection racket, you pay the boss so he doesn't break your knees. In Riker's view, men are paying the state via taxes to fund a system that actively demonizes them. Men are literally funding the institutions that label their own masculinity as toxic.
So men are the host, and the gynocracy is the parasite. But he goes a lot further than just the financial cost. He talks about the physical toll. And this is where he counters the famous glass ceiling concept with his own term.
The glass seller.
The glass seller, yeah.
This flips the conventional narrative completely. We always hear about the lack of women in the comfortable air-conditioned boardroom, right? Riker says, okay, but let's look at the basement. And he points to the death gap.
The numbers he pulled for this were just staggering.
They really are. He cites Bureau of Labor Statistics data showing men make up over 90% of workplace fatalities. We're not talking about sending emails in an office. We're talking about the guys out on the oil rigs, deep sea fishing, logging, high voltage line repair, roofing.
It creates this incredibly stark image. You have the gynocracy, as he calls it, writing HR complaints about the office temperature being sexist, while men are out there literally being crushed, burned, or vaporized just to maintain the power grid that runs that air conditioner.
And Riker argues this is the invisible infrastructure that women and the state take entirely for granted. Historically, this exchange men providing dangerous labor and protection in exchange for family and respect was the deal. But Riker argues the state has broken that deal by stepping in and becoming the surrogate husband.
This is a crucial concept in the text. The state replacing the father.
Yes, the government effectively replaces the role of the male provider. It allows women to, quote, marry the government. The state provides the security, the resources, police protection, the safety net.
Which means she doesn't need the individual man for survival anymore.
Exactly. It allows women to effectively divorce the individual man. But, and here is the absolute kicker of his argument, the individual man is still footing the bill through his taxes.
It's like you're paying alimony to a society that hates you, whether you're married or not. You are subsidizing your own obsolescence.
That is his economic baseline, but he says this extraction isn't just financial, it's a war on the mind. And that leads to probably the most provocative chapter title in the entire book.
Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
Yeah, that title absolutely stops you in your tracks. Obviously, he's provoking a visceral reaction there. He's arguing there is a deliberate propaganda war happening, right?
He is. He argues there's a highly coordinated psychological operation embedded in the education system and the media, and it's designed to demonize natural masculinity as a pathology. He calls it the gelding of boys.
Gelding, as in castrating a horse to make it docile. That is a rough image. But if you have a son in the school system right now, you might actually know exactly what he's talking about.
Riker argues the modern classroom has been totally feminized. Think about natural boy behavior. Competition, rough and tumble play, high energy, risk-taking, and interest in things rather than feelings. In the modern school system, Riker claims these traits are immediately labeled toxic, or they're misdiagnosed as ADHD.
Because if a boy can't sit perfectly still in a chair for 6 hours and talk about his feelings, the system decides there's something medically wrong with him.
Riker says we are drugging the explorers and the innovators into submission. And he uses a very specific, almost ridiculous example from the news to prove this zero-tolerance hysteria. Did you catch the Pop-Tart pistol story in the book?
I did, and it sounds like pure satire, like something out of The Onion, but it's completely real. A 7-year-old boy gets suspended from school for biting his breakfast pastry into the shape of a gun.
It really happened, and Riker uses it as proof of the system's deep paranoia regarding men. He says it's the literal criminalization of the male protector instinct at age 7. The curriculum has shifted away from logos, meaning logic, hard skills, stoicism, objective truth, to emotional learning and socialization.
And he believes this is a deliberate strategy to turn potential kings into compliant tax cattle.
Precisely. And he points out that it certainly doesn't get any better when they get to university. This is where he introduces the concept of the institutional hydra.
Let's talk about the Hydra. This is where he attacks the university system, specifically focusing heavily on Title IX tribunals.
Right. Riker argues that due process, which is literally the cornerstone of Western justice, has been entirely erased on college campuses. The standard has shifted from innocent until proven guilty to guilty because a woman said so.
And this connects directly to a term he uses a lot in this section, standpoint epistemology. We should unpack that because it sounds like dense academic jargon, but the real-world impact of it is terrifying.
It is academic jargon, but the application is dangerous. It effectively means feelings over facts. In this framework, a woman's subjective feeling of being unsafe is treated as objective, actionable evidence that she is unsafe.
So if she feels offended, you are objectively guilty of an offense.
Exactly. And Riker says this dynamic creates what he calls the pink ghetto effect in the professional and academic worlds.
The pink ghetto, that's the environment where men just decide to check out, right?
Yes. Men in the workplace or the university see the rigged rules and they simply stop engaging. They stop mentoring women. They stop socializing after work. They refuse to take a meeting with a female colleague if the office door is closed.
They withdraw entirely to avoid the risk of a career-ending false accusation.
Riker calls it a completely rational response to an entirely irrational risk.
So men are seeing the trap in the corporate workplace and stepping back. But Riker argues the most dangerous contract a man can ever sign isn't an employment contract, it's a marriage license.
Oh, absolutely. This brings us to his chapter on the war on the family, which he calls the legal slaughterhouse.
It's a heavy part of the book. He analyzes the family court system, and again, he views it strictly as a wealth transfer mechanism aimed at breaking fathers. And he focuses a lot of his fire on no-fault divorce.
He does. Now, we usually hear about no-fault divorce framed as this great liberating milestone of the 20th century. But Riker looks at it strictly like a contract lawyer.
Right, he says a valid contract requires consideration and it requires consequences for a breach. But no-fault divorce allows a woman to unilaterally end the most important contract of a man's life without cause.
She doesn't have to prove abuse, she doesn't have to prove infidelity, she can just be bored. And yet, she retains the assets, she keeps the house, and she almost always gets the children. Riker argues this legal framework actively incentivizes divorce as a profit maximization strategy.
That is an incredibly cynical take. But if the state is serving as the backup husband, like we talked about earlier, the financial risk of her leaving the marriage is basically gone. In fact, she might be financially better off.
Exactly. Riker argues the system literally pays women to destroy their own families. And then he brings up the silver bullet strategy.
The silver bullet. This is the nuclear option in divorce proceedings.
The false allegation or the preemptive restraining order. Riker describes these as tactical nukes in family court. A woman can claim she just feels afraid. She can secure an ex parte restraining order without the father even being in the room to defend himself and instantly strip him of his home, his kids, and his property.
It bypasses due process entirely. It's terrifying because it happens overnight. You're locked out of your own house before you even realize you're in a legal battle.
And in response to this overwhelming legal bias, Riker proposes something pretty radical. He introduces the concept of the paper abortion.
Right. This is his attempt to apply logic, the logos we mentioned, to the modern feminist concept of her body, my wallet.
Yes. Riker argues that if a woman has the absolute unassailable legal right to choose not to be a mother via abortion, a man should have the exact same legal right to surrender his financial responsibility early in a pregnancy.
A financial abortion.
Exactly. The logic is symmetrical. If she can opt out of motherhood, he should be able to opt out of fatherhood. Riker argues that forcing a man to pay for 18 years for a child he explicitly did not want, when the woman had the sole legal choice to end or continue the pregnancy, is a literal form of indentured servitude.
It certainly cuts right through the double standard. And he connects this anti-father legal system to a much broader, darker picture, what he calls the altar of Moloch.
Right, referencing the ancient deity associated with child sacrifice. He points to the ongoing demographic collapse in the West. The total fertility rate has dropped to around 1.6, which is well below replacement levels.
We are just not having enough kids to sustain the population.
No. Riker frames the abortion industrial complex and this hostile family court system as a civilization eating its own future just to fund its current lifestyle. He argues the gynocracy is sacrificing its own descendants for the immediate short-term comfort of the welfare aristocracy.
It's a very grim picture of a society consuming itself from the inside out. But to his credit, Riker doesn't just rant about the symptoms, he digs deep into the foundational philosophy behind why this is happening. He keeps bringing up the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer is really the philosophical backbone of the entire manifesto. Riker dedicates a huge section to what he calls Schopenhauer's red pill, and he delves deeply into Schopenhauer's concept of female solipsism.
Now, solipsism is one of those words people tend to misuse. In traditional philosophy, it's the idea that only your own mind is sure to exist. How exactly does Riker apply that here?
Riker interprets it as a fundamental inability to see outside one's own immediate emotional needs. He constantly contrasts logos, which he associates with the masculine traits of logic, order, long-term structure, and self-sacrifice, with eros, or chaos.
Which he links to the feminine traits of emotion and immediate gratification.
Yes. So he says the entire system has become solipsistic. It only cares about how it feels right now. He calls it the hypostatization of feelings.
That's quite a mouthful.
It is, but the concept is simple. It basically means society now treats subjective, fleeting feelings as if they are hard, objective, scientific facts. Riker argues we completely ignore male data, like the the suicide rates, the homelessness epidemic, the workplace deaths, because those objective facts don't fit the preferred emotional narrative of female victimhood.
If the facts hurt feelings, the facts are thrown out.
Exactly.
Which is an incredibly dangerous way to run a civilization. So if facts don't matter to the system and the legal system is rigged against you and the schools are hostile to your sons, what is a guy actually supposed to do? Riker talks about stoicism, but not in the standard just endure it way.
No, he calls for a weaponized stoicism. It is the absolute refusal to apologize for existing. Riker tells his readers to totally reject collective guilt. He says, you didn't oppress anyone, you built the power grid. You paved the roads, you kept the lights on. Do not apologize for your competence.
Do not apologize for your competence.
Yeah.
I really love that line. It's a very empowering message for his audience. But let's get to the actual solution, because Riker is very, very clear about one thing. You cannot vote your way out of a gynocracy.
There is no political solution. That's a massive takeaway from the book. Riker argues that the welfare aristocracy, that coalition of women and the state, holds a permanent, unbreakable voting majority.
Because they outnumber the net positive male taxpayer.
Exactly. They will always mathematically vote for more safety, more resources, and more extraction from men. The math, in his view, makes a traditional political victory completely impossible. You cannot vote away the gynocracy because the gynocracy counts the votes.
That's got to be a hard pill to swallow for guys who are out there knocking on doors and trying to be politically active. He's essentially saying the ballot box is a rigged game.
Yeah.
So if you can't vote them out, what is his prescription?
You leave.
Yeah.
You withdraw your participation. He talks about going gold.
Ah, the Atlas Shrugged reference. When the producers of the world simply stop producing.
Right. Riker advises a strategy of strategic withdrawal. Men dropping out of the corporate workforce, lying flat, and absolutely refusing to sign a marriage contract under current laws. If the system relies entirely on male labor and male taxes to function, Riker says the only way to break the system is to starve it of that fuel.
Starving the beast. And he gets surprisingly specific here on how to do that. It's not just, quit your job and go live in a cabin in the woods. He gets into the weeds on money.
He is a huge advocate for Bitcoin and parallel economies. Riker argues that fiat currency, like the US dollar or that pound, is the primary tool of the gynocracy.
Because the state controls it.
Because the state can print endless amounts of it to fund the welfare state, which effectively taxes your savings through inflation. He advises men to move their assets into Bitcoin to escape that inflation tax and deny the state control over their stored wealth.
And he also talks about building the counter economy.
Yes. Working in the gig economy, utilizing gray markets, doing cash work, bartering, anything that legally denies the state the income tax revenue it needs to survive. He says men need to focus on building a new Manosphere Jerusalem.
That sounds almost biblical. The new Manosphere Jerusalem. What exactly is the vision there?
It's a vision of a completely parallel society. Riker imagines men building new, decentralized institutions based strictly on logic, property rights, and masculine virtue, entirely separate from the state apparatus.
Because he thinks the current system is going to crash anyway.
He believes the current gynocracy is mathematically doomed to collapse because it fundamentally consumes more than it produces. It's essentially a geopolitical Ponzi scheme that is rapidly running out of new investors.
It's totally unsustainable. You can't consume more than you produce forever. The math always wins.
The math always wins. So the New Jerusalem is the lifeboat that men need to build to survive the inevitable crash and rebuild afterwards. It's a surgical strike, as he calls it. He's not asking the system for permission to change. He's saying, stop asking. Just build your own world.
It really shifts the entire focus from trying to fix a broken system to just outlasting it. It's about building something solid that can stand when the rotten structure finally falls.
And that leads to the final challenge Riker leaves with the reader. The system relies entirely on your ongoing consent and your daily labor. It needs you to keep the lights on, it needs you to pay the taxes, it needs you to enforce its laws. Riker simply asks, what happens if you just stop?
What happens if Atlas shrugs?
Exactly. It forces you to look at the social contract and ask if it's still valid for you. Riker says the contract has been torn up by the other party, and it's time to stop honoring a void agreement.
That makes me think of something not explicitly in the book, but it builds right on top of this. If a society entirely shifts to eros, to emotion and chaos and comfort, and it totally abandons the logos of hard structure and sacrifice, how does that society survive on the global stage? What happens to the gynocracy when a foreign adversary that still strictly enforces logos and masculine duty decides to knock on the door?
That is a chilling thought. A society that has alienated its protectors is extremely vulnerable when real, undeniable danger shows up.
Exactly. It's a provocative question to leave you with to really mull over. Listen, we have packed a ton into this session, but honestly, we have only scratched the surface of the gynocracy. Riker goes into way more detail on the history of these institutions, the deep philosophy, and the hard economic data.
It is a dense, incredibly heavy book. If this conversation sparked something in you, you really need to read the full text.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy The Gynocracy by Conrad Riker. It is an absolute must-read for anyone trying to navigate this chaotic modern landscape. It will profoundly change how you see the world.
And if you want to keep up with Riker's ongoing analysis, which I highly recommend doing, make sure you follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack. He is dropping unfiltered truth bombs there on a regular basis.
That is all for today's deep dive. We hope this gave you some serious food for thought. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you these deep dives. Until next time, keep your eyes open and question everything.
Stay sovereign.